Saddle up the horse and cart, nail down the lid, and dig out your best black suit because the smack is back. And this week we're attending a funeral of sorts as we continue our journey through every In Your House ever, with In Your House 11 buried alive. As always, I am your host, the Maniac Matt, and before we begin, I just want to thank you all for sticking with me while Travis is away. We're on a journey to the promised land, ladies and gentlemen. Now, before we get into this, you can find me, as always, on Twitter at The Perfect Tenant. You can find Travis on Twitter at The Habiki TMD. Go and show him some love. Unionsmack.bigcartel.com for all of your merchandise needs. And, of course, Lulu.com, where you can purchase a copy of my books, The Undertaker, A Trip Down Death Valley, and NXT UK Year 1. Now, we are on October the 20th, 1996. The Market Square Arena from Indianapolis, Indiana, and with no Shawn Michaels on the main card for the first time in 1996, I think. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to go all the way back through all the pay-per-views, the main 5 and all the In Your Houses, but I think this was the first In Your House that didn't have Shawn Michaels wrestling on the main card. WWF were building heavily towards the Survivor Series the next month, and there were several loose ends that needed tying up, and several more to dangle actually before they reached Madison Square Garden. These included who would challenge and ultimately end Shawn Michaels' reign, the entire Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin saga, which was moving along at a nice pace actually, without Bret Hart even on television. Removing Vader from the main event picture thanks to the protestations, let's call them, of Shawn Michaels, because you know, he's Shawn Michaels. Breaking up the smoking gun so Billy and Bart could embark on doomed singles runs, and of course removing The Undertaker from television so he could have that hero's return in the world's most famous arena. Only that may have been an oversight actually, because the prospect of Steve Austin versus Bret Hart, that at least for me, and I know for a lot of other fans, a first time match like that was draw enough to bring you into Survivor Series. In many ways though, In Your House 11 is both the last of the traditional In Your House events in the way they would be booked in the beginning of a new phase of the WWF. Last week we looked at how In Your House 10 moved away from the 1995 lardy-dardy silver lining, larger-than-life cartoon character style wrestling, and more towards the Attitude Era with its matches and pacing and just the overall feel. But In Your House 11 is undoubtedly, I can't speak, the next step, and it felt more like a WCW pay-per-view actually, with its brand new set and gritty atmosphere. Now, before we get into this, I have to put out a disclaimer and warning here. The cold still isn't 100% better from last week, and if you tuned in last week, you know, like I was croaky, I was I was straining my words. It's still not better. I've still got a cough. If I sound monotone or if I just sound boring, then apologies. There's not much I can do about it, but it is clearing up. It is getting better. Now, In Your House 11, Buried Alive, began with the free-for-all match, which saw the Stalker Barry Windham defeat Justin Hawk Bradshaw. There's nothing at all to note about that match, or about Bradshaw, or about the Stalker. So we will jump straight into In Your House 11, which began with a gripping video package that focused on a gravestone and kept flashing to the war between The Undertaker and Mankind. And if you're under any delusion that this event was built around anything other than this war, which had been brewing for, almost half a year now, then you'd be put right by the time the lightning struck on the finale. The Undertaker voices over the opening video package and says that he will destroy Mankind and be his judge, jury and executioner. Now, as The Undertaker talks, Mankind screeches some type of promo that we don't hear underneath, and it sets us up for what's to come perfectly. The graphic, I will say, for this In Your House event is a tombstone breaking in two, which looked very good indeed. Even the In Your House graphic was all about the main event. You have to look very carefully for these little things, but it was a good sign that Vince could see that he had to change to stay alive, and was at least trying his best to match the WCW as best he could. As we cut into the arena, we're met by the grave, which has been purposely built by a brand new staging for this In Your House, in the form of large cemetery gates. It would be the precursor, this, to different pay-per-view stages once the company bled out In Your House for regular monthly names like Backlash and No Way Out and so on. And they've gone to the effort of making this look bigger, better, different, and it lends the event a much more important feel, at least in my opinion. Unfortunately, though, they do everything possible to wipe that away with the in-ring action. We are taken to ringside, where Vince McMahon, Jerry Lawler, and a full heel Jim Ross greet us, and there's some instant tension between Ross and McMahon. It is very nicely done. And if you joined us last week for our In Your House 10 review, then you'll know all about the heel Jim Ross and the storyline revolving around fake Razor and fake Diesel, etc. However, that isn't the last we would hear of this rivalry. It'll be a running theme throughout the entire event, and credit where it's due, Jim Ross played the part perfectly. I said last week it was doomed to fail, and from the booking to most of the execution to the story itself, it was the pits. And unbelievable at that, because Jim Ross was so lovable that no one wanted to believe he was a heel. But, credit where it's due, Jim Ross did carry it off really well. And he was the best part about that entire storyline. The first match on the card, Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now how about this for an opener, eh? Two men who go on to shape the future of this industry and the company, jerking the curtain on the B-level pay-per-view. Interestingly enough, though, this wasn't meant to happen at all. This was meant to be Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Savio Vega, again, but Savio Vega was injured on a house show against Steve Austin on October the 13th in Anaheim, California, and he would be out of the company until Survivor Series. Almost forgetting their original feud, actually, which ended at In Your House 8, Beware of Dog, when Vega defeated Austin in that Caribbean strap match. This was born from Savio Vega rescuing Jake Roberts from an attack by Austin and Jerry Lawler, as a matter of fact, on the September the 30th Raw. On the October the 13th WWF Superstars, Stone Cold Steve Austin cost Savio Vega a match against Salvatore Sencia, when the pair's brawl was enough of a distraction to allow Sencia to hit his finisher on Savio. Then, on the October the 14th Raw, Savio Vega attempted to come to Shawn Michaels' rescue after his main event match with Steve Austin. Now, with Michaels under attack, Vader hit the ring but ate a Stone Cold Stunner, and this was of course pre-taped to air after the Savio Vega injury occurred. The entire feud, or let's say the entire stage 2 of Austin versus Savio Vega, was completely designed to allow Austin to get his heat back from the previous loss, especially now he's been elevated to working with Bret Hart. As Helmsley makes his entrance, we are taken to Stone Cold and Kevin Kelly backstage. Kelly asks him if his game plan has changed now he's forced to face Helmsley instead of Vega. Austin tells him that nothing has changed and everyone on the WWF roster is on his list. Austin then barely pauses for breath before saying that there's nothing wrong with Savio Vega, and Bret Hart's return the following night on Raw better be to announce his retirement or he will do it for him. Brilliant. Now, WWF had done a great job of building something exciting and worthy for Bret upon his return to the company following his break after WrestleMania 12. It had festered and built, and in the process, Austin had looked like a complete badass, or badass, as we say over here, or wrong un, in the way he called out Bret Hart, constantly berated him, but the only thing they couldn't do was have Austin target Owen and the British Bulldog yet. That would come. In order to get Bret's attention, because all three men were heels, and it would have undoubtedly made Austin a babyface, such as his popularity at the time. The constant calling out of Bret, though, and labelling him a coward and calling him the shit man, etc., when he didn't show, it was more than enough to garner people's interests. Now, as this match begins, and I promise we will get into it in just a moment, Jim Ross is deliciously heelish on commentary. The story here is that on top of his hatred of Vince McMahon, his headset is now faulty, as where McMahon and Lawler's is fine. It just keeps cutting out. He'd go on to blame Vince throughout this match for setting this up, and he has a wonderful line where he says, "A lot of rich and arrogant people live in Greenwich. Where do you live, Vince?" What a marvellous line that was, and he delivered it to perfection. Now on to the match in question, finally, and unfortunately it's not the spectacle you'd imagine it to be. Even with both men entering important feuds that would elevate them to the next step, and a pay-per-view stage on top of that, this was not good. Not good at all, and it began really slowly with a Hunter arm drag. That sent Austin to the outside, where he argued with an arrogant fat slob at ringside who seemed to think he was the star of the show throughout the night. I hate it when audience members hijack the show, and I don't mean hijacking the show by chanting what they want and, basically getting involved in the match when they know the camera's on them, they know they're sitting opposite hard cam, but they just want to physically and verbally get involved with wrestlers. It really, really pisses me off. I wish Austin had just punched him in his many, many chins. Now, when Austin finally returned to the ring, he hit an arm drag of his own, gave Hunter the middle fingers, which popped the crowd, but unfortunately this was the cue for Helmsley to go and have a word with Jabba the Gut. They stall for what seems like an eternity, engage in a slapping match, and Austin nails him with a beautiful right hand. Unfortunately though, this sent Hunter back to the outside, and it just wastes more time. When it finally does get going again, we're treated to a parade of holds, which Austin locks in perfectly, and plays up to the sort of the careless son of a bitch character that he's growing into. Hunter grabs the advantage with a knee to the gut as Austin rebounds off the ropes, but it's evident from the onset that the real storyline is on commentary, and it really overshadows this match completely as Jim Ross gets more and more annoyed with Vince McMahon. Now, don't get me wrong, it's funny, it's entertaining enough to watch, but the in-ring action of this match suffers for it. The bout briefly livens as the pair trade sleeper holds. They fail to keep the pace enough to build a dramatic finale, and it stalls again as they connect with double clotheslines, and then out comes Mr. Perfect to accost Helmsley's valet. Why, I hear you ask? Well, that's a completely different story altogether. So let's just break away from this match to go into why this is important. So in August of 1996, Mr. Perfect began to come to ringside and take away Hunter Hearst Helmsley's valets. The distraction cost Helmsley his fair share of matches, and that included an Intercontinental Championship tournament bout against Psycho Sid on Raw Championship Friday on September the 6th, 1996. On that same episode, they had to be held apart by officials. Now, on the September the 30th Raw, Helmsley challenged Mr. Perfect to a match after Curt Hennig had decided to side with Mark Moreau and guide him to the Intercontinental Championship, which was the night after In Your House 10 when Moreau beat Farouk. Perfect accepted the match, and the bout was said to be taking place on the October the 21st Raw, so the night after this, after In Your House 11. On the same day's WWF Superstars, which aired before In Your House, Mr. Perfect had taunted Helmsley from the commentary desk about their match. And that's as much as I'm going to say right now, because I don't want to spoil what's to come later. But we will get to where this feud went, what happened during the match, and how it eventually led to Hunter Hearst Helmsley's first ever Intercontinental Championship win and reign. But you will have to keep listening to this show to find out. Now, back to the match in hand, and with Mr. Perfect leaving with his valet, Helmsley goes to argue with his rival, and the whole thing ends with Perfect getting a drink in the face from Austin, who just didn't give a fuck. Hunter goes to the pedigree, but again distracted when Perfect makes his way up the aisle with his woman. Hunter goes after him. Helmsley then trades blows with Steve Austin in the aisle, which includes a suplex, and once they're back in the ring, Austin misses a running hangman choke on the second rope, which he blocks with his leg, gives the crowd the double fingers, and hits a sloppy stunner for the victory. Now, I know this has been a lengthy opening bout, and I apologise if you're bored, but these events do have significance in and on the fallout of In Your House, and like I said, Hunter capturing his first Intercontinental Championship. Plus, you all know me by now. It's been 3 years. I love the history, and I love to cover every basis as and where I can. As for the match itself, this should have been much better than it was. Helmsley wasn't the in-ring talent he would become. We've covered that. But he was still getting very good, and Austin was a great talent already between the ropes. If you don't believe me, just look at what he did before he left WCW. Here, far too much stalling, far too much piddling about. For me, I know Helmsley was on his way to the Intercontinental title, but Austin was on his way to something much more important, so I would have booked him to go over a little stronger than he actually did. We're given a video package of the Smoking Guns, which includes them winning the WWF Tag Team Championships from the Godwins and then losing the titles to Davey Boy Smith and Owen Hart at In Your House 10, which, again, we reviewed last week for you good, disturbed, wonderful people. Doc Hendricks is then shown backstage with Billy and Bart and questions Billy's preoccupation with Sunny. He says it cost them the titles and asks them if they can get refocused now she's out of the picture. Billy Gunn is really good here, and credit where it's due. He was really good throughout this whole storyline. The whole infatuation with Sunny thing. He jumps straight down Michael Hayes' throat and asks him how he knows she's out of the picture. He then says that Sunny will be back when he wins back the WWF Tag Team Championships. Note the wording of he wins back, not when they win back. Bart Gunn then jumps in and reminds Billy that it's them and not him, which Billy doesn't care about. And like I said, great job here by Billy Gunn of coming across self-centered, and the writing is clearly on the wall, or was clearly on the wall, for the duo. That sets up our next match for the WWF Tag Team Championship match. The champions, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, versus the Smoking Guns in a rematch of In Your House 10. But if you didn't join us for that, then the quick recap is that the Smoking Guns lost the championships to Owen and Davey after Billy became preoccupied with flirting with Sunny at ringside. The Bulldog pushed Bart into Billy, who wasn't looking. Billy then pushed Bart back into Davey, who caught him in a running power slam for the victory. The Smoking Guns had then spent the time in between In Your House 10 and In Your House 11 trying to get their rematch, which they got after defeating the New Rockers on the October the 7th Raw. But for Billy, it was all about getting Sunny back. All caught up? Good, let's get into this match. Now, unbelievably, this is the second heel versus heel match in a row, and it shows in crowd reaction. Unlike In Your House 10, when this, again, was still a heel versus heel match, they didn't mind it so much. I can't put my finger on this. The feeling in the arena is just very, very odd by the time this match starts. Billy and Owen begin with Billy controlling with a headlock takedown and a hip toss. He uses Owen's hair to hold on to the headlock and then drops the King of Hearts with a clothesline. Owen regains the advantage when he catches Billy coming off of the rope and manages the tag to the British Bulldog. Now, Davey Boy Smith versus Bart Gunn isn't very interesting at all, and instead of having to see too much of it, we're taken to Sunny, who is watching on a monitor backstage. As it would transpire, she's actually eyeing Owen and the Bulldog because they have the gold, but I do not recall anything ever coming of this, and the whole thing is dropped and forgotten by the time we reach In Your House 12. Bart catches Davey Boy in a lovely power slam, but misses a top rope crossbody, and Owen nails a missile dropkick as he tags in. The champions control the next part of the match with quick tags and power moves. The problem is that they lose the audience because no one knows who to cheer for, and the crowd are largely silent throughout this, which is to the detriment of the match, actually. Billy becomes distracted on the apron by the Bulldog and then a fan member, and Owen sends Bart careering into him, which causes the Guns to argue and add drama and tension. At least that's the theory. Billy clobbers Owen from behind to gain the advantage and hangs him throat first over the top rope. Bart then gets a near fall with a swinging neckbreaker, and the duo hit another terrible poetry in motion. They really should have stopped doing it after the first time. Like, they must have watched back what they did In Your House 10 to make sure the match wasn't similar or, too dull. They must have seen that poetry in motion and either thought, we fell short on it, or it just looked hideous, let's stop doing it. But they don't, because neither Billy Gunn or Bart Gunn possessed the ability to deviate from the script. Bart sets Owen up for a sidewinder, but Billy is too busy showing off, which allows the Bulldog to sneak up behind Bart, pull him backwards as Billy comes off the rope, and they miss the finisher. With that, Bart and the Bulldog brawl to the outside. Owen clocks Billy with a spinning heel kick for the victory. Owen and the Bulldog retain. Bart then gets in Billy's face, and Billy walks away from his partner. Now, this match was fine, but it was nowhere as good as their In Your House 10 match, for me. It was a one-off, as far as the audience was concerned, and it showed. The lack of atmosphere affected all four men in the ring, and thankfully this was, or would prove to be, the undoing of the Smoking Guns. On the October the 27th Raw, Billy walked out on Bart mid-match after a communication, and that led to them sort of hashing out their differences in a tag team match on the November the 10th Raw, where Bart and Freddie Joe Floyd defeated Billy and TL Hopper. Now, after that match, Billy and Bart shook hands like, storyline brothers do, but then Billy turned on Bart with a clothesline and assaulted him with his boot. After a series of house show matches and Bart Gunn's team beating Billy's in the Survivor Series free-for-all, Billy cost Bart a match against Stone Cold Steve Austin on the November the 24th WWF Superstars, and then cost him the Intercontinental Championship on the December the 8th Superstars. This rivalry came to an end, thankfully, on the December the 16th WWF Superstars, when Bart Gunn defeated Billy Gunn via referee stoppage. This was because Billy received a stinger, which would keep him out of action until February. Next, we were taken to the WWF Superstars line, where an annoyed Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Mr. Perfect are talking to the public. You never see Kurt Hennig, but we can hear him shouting out of shot. Jim Ross is in the ring when the camera cuts back to the arena, and he's had enough of the communication problems. He's on the microphone, he says that Vince McMahon has had his butt kisses turn off his mic, and then he lays into Vince. Jim promises that tomorrow night on Raw he will bring Bret Hart back to the WWF, and then proceeds to argue with Vince McMahon about who bothered to go to South Africa to interview him and undergo contract negotiations. There's more here about how Vince is egotistical, and Ross just walks away, giving Vince the microphone because he says he talks out of both sides of his mouth. Though they'd gotten rid of the most entertaining feud on the show up to this point, it wasn't all bad. Jim Ross and Vince McMahon, like I said during the first match, they had taken over this event. It was a hostile takeover, if you like, and the storyline had outshone every single match thus far. I say every single match, there'd only been two, but it outshone both of them. Now Jim Ross was backstage, we could at least make the matches like the focus of the show, not two warring announcers who'd never be able to settle the enmity inside the ring. It wasn't the last we'd hear of the feud throughout the night. I believe there's one or two more little digs from Jim Ross, but largely, thank God. We are next taken to a video from the free-for-all of Farouk talking about Ahmed Johnson and the injury which he supposedly caused him. Again, for those who didn't join us last week, the entire story is in our In Your House 10 review, so do go back and visit that. Though if we have time later down the line and at a later date when we get into the whole Ahmed Johnson versus Nation of Domination stuff, we will probably recap it. The video then cuts to Ahmed Johnson sat backstage talking about the injury he sustained. Unfortunately, we can't hear what Ahmed is saying because Jerry Lawler and Vince McMahon just decided to talk over the top of it. You know, if you haven't seen the free-for-all, tough, you should have bought it because there's no way they're letting you hear shit here. They do shut up just in time for us to hear Johnson say that he would pay Farouk back. We wouldn't have to wait, actually, for that payback because the video then cuts to Ahmed Johnson attacking Farouk in the locker room and being pulled away by road agents and officials. This is the excuse WWE would use to... I said WWE, didn't I? WWF would use to take Farouk out of the Intercontinental Championship match. In reality, Ron Simmons had suffered an injury in a house show match with Savio Vega on October the 10th and would not compete again until Survivor Series. It's odd that Savio Vega injured Farouk on October the 10th and then was injured himself on October the 13th. We see Mr. Perfect come back out. He is led by Jim Ross and looks like he's ready for a fight, actually. Of course, let's not forget that he was scheduled to battle Helmsley the next night on Raw. We will get into that in just a few minutes. If you've been waiting for it, it is coming up. Perfect goes straight to the commentary desk to take up where Jim Ross left off in berating Vince McMahon. WWF Intercontinental Championship match. Champion Mark Moreau versus Goldust. Now, as originally mentioned, this was meant to be a rematch of the WWF Intercontinental Championship Tournament Final, which took place the night after In Your House 10 and saw Mark Moreau win the gold after he intercepted Sunny's loaded purse, which had a brick inside, not her ego, and nailed Farouk with it. On the October 7th Raw, it was then announced that Moreau would defend against Farouk at In Your House 11. They'd done battles on house shows and live events across the country, with Moreau always coming away with the victory. With Goldust the replacement for Farouk, this match was already a bit of a come down, especially after the last few In Your House events. After his boring matches against The Undertaker, I really could have done without seeing another Goldust match for a few more weeks. But unfortunately, this is what WWF cobbled together in a blind panic. And at the end of this, I'll tell you why they could have gone a completely different way. As Goldust makes his entrance, we are taken to Mark Moreau and Sable, who are waiting backstage. After Jerry Lawler asks him if he has cold feet getting in the ring with Goldust, Moreau tells him that he has no time for Jerry, and it was unfortunate what happened to Farouk, but he's concentrating on defeating Goldust. This is a rematch from SummerSlam, which Goldust won. The match begins with Goldust trying to feel Moreau up, and by winter of 1996, it's fair to say that the character had become predictable and boring, and not just in the ring either. It was the same thing every match, every feud, and though the transition into the artist formerly known as Goldust was criticised by many, it was at least something unpredictable. I didn't like it whatsoever, but I didn't like 1996 Goldust very much either. Mark Moreau nails a few arm drags and dragon screws, which he turns into an arm lock, and then there's a swing around arm drag, which looks really, really bad. Goldust is out of place, Moreau doesn't get the full rotation, and it just looks like Rose collapses on him. It just looks like he's had a stroke and just collapses straight on top of him. I know I've gotten on Goldust as well in recent weeks for this and that and the other, if you like. But here he looks so slow, and there's no urgency to what he's doing whatsoever. So, for example, he whips Mark Moreau into the buckles, and then just very slowly plods towards him early in the match. So he can't even use fatigue as an excuse. It's like there's just no interest of showing any effort on Dustin Rhodes' part. Mark Moreau comes back with a flying head scissors and backdrop. He nails a cannonball senton over the top rope to the arena floor, which looked really nice, and then makes his way back in with a slingshot leg drop. Once again, you can say what you want about Mark Moreau in the ring in 1996, but he added the energy and pace where it was needed, and matches like this really needed his enthusiasm. God only knows what this would have come out like had we had two Goldusts. Speaking of which, Goldust countered a moonsault attempt with a powerbomb variation from the top rope, followed it up with a rebound clothesline and rear chin lock, which the match really didn't need. It needed an injection of pace, which is what Mark Moreau gave it when he fought back with punches, and they took each other out of the match with a double crossbody, which made me sigh just a little bit. Goldust then got on the microphone and told the crowd to shut up or he'd stick his tongue down their throats. Jesus Christ. Moreau hits a springboard rotation moonsault for a lovely near fall, snags another when he counters the curtain call into the same double leg roll up that was credited with busting Steve Austin open at King of the Ring. Goldust breaks Moreau's momentum with a backdrop over the top rope, and this signals the end of the bout. As Mr. Perfect goes to check on Mark Moreau, remember they're friends, Helmsley comes to ringside to confront the former Intercontinental Champion. With Perfect distracted, Goldust sneaks up on him, but Hennig turns and punches Rhodes, which allows Moreau to take the advantage, Samoan drop and Wild Thing for the victory. Mark Moreau and Mr. Perfect then celebrate in the ring after the match. Now this was fine. It wasn't bad. I enjoyed it more than I liked their SummerSlam match. But ever since he'd won the title, WWF had booked Mark Moreau to look like a lucky champion, a fluke. He'd always used some type of help or distraction to retain the gold, and even when he won the title, he used Sonny's loaded purse. And you could attribute every retention of the gold, on television at least, to the aid of Mr. Perfect. Now, as it would turn out, the entire Mark Moreau Intercontinental Championship reign was just a ruse to initiate a feud with Hunter Hearst Helmsley, as we would see the next night on Raw. Now, maybe initiate a feud is the wrong wording, if you like, because they'd been going back and forth since WrestleMania 12, and they would again at In Your House 12, which is to come next week for you lucky people. However, now we can finally get into the meat and bones of the whole Mr. Perfect Hunter Hearst Helmsley story. The next night on Raw, with Mr. Perfect ready to battle Helmsley, Hunter attacked him backstage and ran a cart into his leg. This caused Gorilla Monsoon to replace Hennig with Mark Moreau in the match, but Helmsley would only accept if the Intercontinental title was on the line. Now, in a fishy moment, which obviously signposted what was to come, Mr. Perfect agreed to the stipulation on Moreau's behalf, and the culmination of the match saw Mr. Perfect turn heel on Mark Moreau and cost him the Intercontinental Championship when he hit him with a steel chair. Helmsley and Perfect united, but the partnership didn't last because 3 weeks after this, Helmsley left the company. Now, people say he jumped to WCW, but in actual fact, he didn't sign with WCW until mid-1997. So, with all that said, I'll keep my promise and tell you how Mark Moreau versus Goldust could have been avoided and amended. The whole time, the entire plan was to have Moreau drop the title to Helmsley, right? So why not bring the entire plan forward one night? Have Curt Hennig accept Helmsley's challenge for a match but at In Your House, then be attacked by Hunter, and then the whole thing plays out as it did on Raw, but on pay-per-view when more people are watching. It would have saved Helmsley having to have a boring, dull match against Austin. It would have saved Moreau looking like a dunce champion, needing help to retain. And it would have given Helmsley a greater impetus as champion, when he won it, to prevail on pay-per-view. There was literally no reason they couldn't have booked the whole angle to end it In Your House. You know, with more eyes on the product than there was on Raw the next night, WWF may have found more people actually tuning in to see how this played out. There was no reason to replace Farouk with Goldust. There was no reason to even have Moreau versus Farouk penciled in at all when this was always slated to happen the night after on Raw. We're taken back to the WWF Superstar line where Jim Ross is with fake Razor and fake Diesel. We can't hear what he's saying, but it looks like he's running down Vince McMahon. A video package then airs for Psycho Sid versus Vader, which shows both men powerbombing different victims and bragging over whose powerbomb was the best. In actual fact, this rivalry started all the way back at In Your House 9 International Incident. I had to think for a minute then. We've been through so many In Your House events. It continued on house shows and television when Sid came to the rescue of Shawn Michaels at In Your House 10 and brawled with Vader up the aisle. And then from there, it went on to the September the 30th Raw, where Sid again saved Shawn after Vader tried to hit him with the Vader Bomb. The match was made official on the October the 7th Raw, and it was announced as a number one contenders match for the right to face Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series. On that same Raw, Vader attacked Sid after his match with Goldust, hit a splash, but in typical Sid style, he no-sold the attack, jumped straight to his feet and dropped Vader with a chokeslam. It's safe to say that Vader was done as a main event player in 1996, thanks to Shawn Michaels and his cronies. On the October the 14th Raw, Sid then distracted Vader during his match with Phineas Godwin. Jesus. And in the main event of the same episode of Raw, Vader and Sid came face to face once again when Vader interfered in the match between Shawn and Stone Cold. During the bout, Shawn was whipped into Sid, which caused tension in the ranks. You can see how boring this all was on television. I'm bored reading it, and I'm sure you're bored listening to it. So let's skip forward a little bit, shall we? The package cuts to Shawn Michaels, who weighs up, who has the advantage. And the fact that this is a number one contenders match is only mentioned by Vince McMahon on commentary, as if it's an afterthought. Yeah, this is going to settle your Survivor Series main event, your fifth biggest event of the year. So it might have been a good idea to actually mention the fact that they were fighting for an opportunity to face Shawn in November. You know, instead of who has the biggest cock, really. Who cares more about the main championship? That would have been nice. Number one contenders match, Psycho Sid versus Vader. Sid is out first for the biggest pop of the night, and even today I still don't understand why people love Psycho Sid as much as they did. Don't get me wrong, I liked him, but he got such great receptions that it was almost godlike. I guess it's proof how charisma can get you over when you're lacking between the ropes. People didn't care that he could barely wrestle or that he could, barely string two moves together. They loved him because he was something different to what they were being fed. And today's stars could learn a lot from Sid. He was different to Shawn at the time. He was different to Diesel. And I think fans just latched onto him and thought, do you know what, he's not perfect, but he's the best we've got right now. Of course, Shawn Michaels is out last to provide commentary for the bout, and before making his way to the commentary position, he enters the ring to shake Sid's hand and have a word with Vader. Probably something along the lines of, your main event career is over. Because, he's Shawn Michaels. I will say, though, he looked like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders that he didn't have to compete on the main card, even though he did compete in a dark match after the event. After he'd had his words with both men, Shawn took Jim Cornette's handkerchief, wiped his nose, threw it on the canvas, and as Cornette went to pick it up, he kicked him out of the ring. That signalled the beginning of the match, which it kicked off straight away after that. Vader and Sid went at each other with hard punches. Sid got the advantage with a big boot and leg drop. Sid hit a 5-punch in the corner, but the tide turned when he tried to slam Vader and couldn't manage it. And Vader wailed away on him in the corner. Again, this is your standard, typical big man match. So there was, the expectations were very low. Which was, it was good because it made the match better. Vader hit his corner splash, and once Sid was on the outside, Jim Cornette nailed him with the tennis racket. Somewhat unusually, Vader just stood in the ring while the referee counted, when he could have splashed Sid on the outside, broke his ribs by putting him through the announcer's table, and been on his way to Madison Square Garden, where he would have defeated Shawn Michaels for the WWF Championship, as per the original plan. But no, standing there like a dunce is far, far more effective. Sid beats the referee's 10 count, he hits a sunset flip back into the ring, which looked great, but Vader dropped onto him, and from there the match went back and forth. Vader caught Sid off of a flying crossbody, splashed him from the second rope, but pulled him up on a pinfall attempt. Then a Vader bomb attempt went awry when Sid got his knees up and dropped Vader with a chokeslam. As Sid went for his powerbomb, Jim Cornette climbed onto the apron, and Sid broke the move to pull the second rope up between Jim's legs. The distraction allowed Vader to take control, but Sid reversed his momentum and goes for another powerbomb, which Vader again counters with a low blow behind the referee's back. It's a really, really good series of exchanges, especially for Sid, who wasn't known for his fluency in the ring. Sid then blocked Vader's powerbomb, hit a chokeslam for the victory. And as I mentioned earlier, this was meant to be Vader going to Survivor Series, but after SummerSlam, Shawn would not work with Leon White in singles competition on a main show again, let alone drop the title to him. The camera cut to Shawn Michaels on commentary, and he didn't look any too pleased, actually. He got into the ring to congratulate Sid, and then the pair exchanged words but shook hands. Surprisingly, this was a good match, and it wasn't terrible either, which is what everyone expected. It's worth the watch if you're going to, sit through this event. We're then shown an advert for the WWF Hall of Fame ceremony and Survivor Series. Doc Hendricks is backstage talking about his memories of the WWF Hall of Fame when Vince McMahon interrupts him to sell tickets for Survivor Series. It all comes across as a little bit desperate, if you like. Doc Hendricks is then joined by Sid, but before he can ask him any questions, Jim Ross enters shot and says there will be no more McMahon questions. Great line. Ross goes into how Sid turned on Shawn in 1995 and asks if he'll do anything, including breaking Shawn's back, to be WWF champion. Sid says that yes, he'll do anything, but he botches this promo really badly. And it was a clear attempt to turn Sid heel, but it never worked. He was too loved by the fans. A video package aired for the Buried Alive match between The Undertaker and Mankind, which encapsulated their entire history. Unfortunately, it wasn't in chronological order for those who have missed weekly television, and it was told through a series of captions followed by footage. The first caption read the beginning and saw Mankind hitting The Undertaker with elbow drops off of the apron. The second caption read the caskets and saw Mankind wrapping a casket in wire on Raw and beating it up as The Undertaker talked over the top. We were also shown various highlights of the pair's interaction at past In Your House events and Paul Bearer turning on The Undertaker at SummerSlam. Caption 3 was The Mind Games, which was, of course, the tagline to last week's In Your House. And it recapped Mankind coming up through the ring at In Your House 9 International Incident, and The Undertaker being carried away from SummerSlam by Druids. The Brawls was the next cab off the rank, which just saw them beating the shit out of each other. And then we got Buried Alive, and The Undertaker saying that he will dig Mankind's grave as we see him doing just that. Then we see Mankind lean over the grave as The Undertaker says that he won't have a nice day and he will bury him alive. I did not like this video package. It may be the first video package from an In Your House I haven't taken to. It felt disjointed and like they had so much footage they couldn't be bothered to include it all in an order that would make sense to the public. But let's not gripe, because finally the main event of In Your House 11, Buried Alive, was the Buried Alive match, The Undertaker versus Mankind. Now, I feel like I've been calling this In Your House 10 throughout, so if I have, then apologies. I'm not a well man. Finally, and not before time either, Undertaker, Mankind, Buried Alive match. And honestly, when I was watching this and writing up the notes for the episode, it just felt like an age had passed since the beginning. I'm sure you feel the same, having listened to me drone on for what feels like hours, but here we are. So I just ask, for a little more of your time, and we can put this behind us and move on to NXT UK next. It's a long week now, isn't it? We begin with NXT UK, we end with In Your House, and then we're straight back on the trail. How long that will last, I don't know. This match started hot with the Undertaker hard shots in the corner, but Mankind fought back as they went back and forth in front of a remarkably hot crowd. Undertaker hit a flying clothesline from the top rope into the aisle, which looked magnificent, and within minutes of the beginning, they are both fighting towards the grave, where Mankind shoves a shovel, try saying that when you're drunk, into the Undertaker's face. The Undertaker catches Mankind in an inside cradle, and the pair roll down the side of the grave and into the aisle. It looked weird. I'll be honest with you, it looked a little bit weird. It looked like those small toys that you give babies. Weebles, is it? I think they're called. I don't know whether you've got them in America. But they've got a round bottom, and you place them on top of something, and they just roll down it, because they're perfectly spherical. Anyway, the fight goes back to the ring, and the Undertaker rams Mankind into the steel steps. They do get back into the ring, but it's brief. And seconds later, they're on the outside again, where the Undertaker uses the camera cable to choke Mankind. Both men fight into the crowd as the Undertaker whips Mankind back over the rail and takes flight with a running clothesline over the guardrail, which looks spectacular. Mark Calloway did some things in this match that looked really, really spectacular. By this point, though, the crowd were well invested, and more so than they'd been most of the night. Paul Bearer pulls down the top rope and crotches the Undertaker on Old School. However, Mankind does nothing of note with the advantage, and instead takes a pencil and jams it into his rival's head. Undertaker grabs the weapon and goes to work on Mankind, and what follows is yet another flying clothesline and leg drop as he goes for Paul Bearer on the outside. The break gives Mankind time to get a steel chair, but the Undertaker blocks the shot, Bearer hits him with the urn, and that allows Mankind to connect with the chair in a shot which sounded sickening. Back to the grave we go, and this time the Undertaker actually goes in, but as Mankind starts to shovel shit, he's pulled in and throws dirt in the Undertaker's eyes to escape. Mankind tries the hip toss, but the Undertaker reverses it and tosses him. I'm not going to say tosses him off. I know all you juvenile people are thinking it. He tosses Mankind down the graveside and back into the aisle. This is the point where the match began to drag for me. They've teased the grave twice now, and both times they've fought their way back to ringside. I'm not saying that some teasing isn't called for. Yeah, you have to tickle the pickle before cooking with it. But going back to the ring a second time drove all the drama and tension from the audience, who were legitimately into this match until this point. Plus, they'd done everything they could in the ring. Like this should have spilled to the backstage area if they really had to take them away from the grave a second time. Mankind hits a double DDT onto the chair, Undertaker leg drops the chair into Mankind's face, and Mankind tries the pile driver onto the concrete, but the Undertaker reverses it and drops him into the steps, and it looked fine. But the attempt to build the audience back up for the finale fell drastically short, even when Undertaker used the steps to batter Mick Foley. After a tombstone, the Undertaker carried Mankind to the grave, where he was caught in the mandible claw, but Taker countered with a choke slam into the grave and buried Mankind for the victory. Now, as the Undertaker refused to stop burying Mick Foley, the Executioner made his debut, clocked the Undertaker with a shovel from behind, dug out Mankind. They then put the Undertaker in the grave, and Goldust, Justin Hawk, Bradshaw, Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Crush all helped Mankind and the Executioner shovel dirt onto the Undertaker. And I shit you not, right? I shit you not when I say this was 5 minutes of grown men frantically trying to fill a hole with dirt before pay-per-view time ran out. that was the end. They got so desperate that Foley began to scrape it in with the shovel and then ditched the utensil altogether and does it by hand like a frantic little dog. It takes forever. The audience begin to throw rubbish at the heels, which all lands in the grave on camera. And then thankfully the lights begin to flicker and thunder roars over the head as the heels run away. Once the grave is full, lightning strikes and the Undertaker's hand shoots up from beneath the surface. This match started out really good and then began to tail off in the middle once they'd done everything humanly possible within the constraints of the stipulation. The constant back and forth from grave to ring, it really killed the heat in the end. And at 18 minutes, it probably should have been a little shorter considering the repetition. It's certainly not as good as I remember from when I watched this as a child. And I reviewed this. I say review. I didn't review. I rewatched this a few years ago, actually. It's still a worthy entry into the Undertaker Mick Foley rivalry. But it still had so much more to come. Like, so much more to come. Including that Hell in a Cell match 2 years down the line. Dark matches for this. The Godwins defeated the New Rockers. And Shawn Michaels defeated Goldust to retain the WWF Championship. Yes, they gave the live crowd 2 doses of Goldust, which amounted to 25 minutes on the night. I added it up. Refunds, anyone? Still, In Your House 11, it's a strange one. It's one of the best remembered In Your House events because of the main event, and it being the first ever Buried Alive match and the first ever so-called unsanctioned match that WWF ever held. But beyond that, it's one of the least enjoyable of the new generation of monthly pay-per-view events. The first 2 matches felt cold and thrown on just for the sake of telling the story, and there were more interesting things that could have been done with the Intercontinental Championship. Yes, we got the main event of Survivor Series settled, and the main event of this, it was a spectacle, even after everything I've said about it, but this event just felt different, and you never quite got used to it before the final credits rolled. For that reason, I'm going to be controversial this week and give it a C. It's not bad. It's not good when measured against some we have reviewed so far. We're 11 in now, and we've seen some really, really good In Your House events. This falls just below the middle of them. For me. What can I say, ladies and gentlemen? We've done it again. Another journey. I thank you very, very much for sticking with me. We are as good as halfway through In Your Houses now. So do join me next week for our weekly NXT UK review and In Your House 12. Monday and Friday. Do be here. I look forward to your company. Before I go, you can find me on Twitter at The Perfect Tenant. You can find Travis on Twitter at The Hibiki TMD. Unionsmack.bigcartel.com for all your merchandise needs, and lulu.com where you can purchase a copy of my book The Undertaker, A Trip Down Death Valley, and a copy of my second book NXT UK Year 1. Now as we're close-ish actually, to the closing date of our giveaway of my NXT UK book, I must remind you, I am looking for you to tell me how many casket matches The Undertaker and Yokozuna had between 1993 and the end of 1994. These include casket matches on pay-per-view events, dark matches, house shows / live events, and even maybe 1 or 2 on television that people knew nothing about. That is for you to research. Get your answers in by October the 31st. DM me your answers, my DMs are open, or tweet me your answers. Do not put them in the comments below because people will copy. If no one gets it bang on, closest to the correct answer wins, and if only one person enters, then you win. So it's worth entering. The winner gets a free copy of my NXT UK Year 1 book. For now though, my friends, I'm off. I'm going to rest my voice. I'm going to watch some NXT UK. Thank you once again for joining me. I love you, I appreciate it, and until next week, cheerio, mates.